By the time High Reeve Alden Holt asked me whether Cedric Vane was the ash crow, the real ash crow had already stolen one of his silver coat buttons. A magpie had taken the button, technically. That distinction became important later. I sat across from Alden in Wyrmford's oath chamber with River soot on my face, a blanket around my shoulders, and my left leg stretched stiffly beneath the table. Outside, the St. Mercy was still burning under the eastern bridge. Pale rune fire crawled across its timbers without smoke, illuminating the river like a second dawn. 31 people had been aboard that barge. The city watch had recovered 12 alive. I was the only one willing to speak. My name was Edith Fen. I was 29 years old, employed as a junior oath-scribe, and supposedly incapable of walking 20 paces without an ashwood cane. My duties usually involved copying merchant contracts and pretending not to notice when wealthy men changed the meaning of a sentence after a poorer person had signed it. That morning, however, Alden believed I had helped 5 criminals raid a royal vessel, free 17 prisoners, steal a forbidden relic, and set fire to half the Black Harbour. He was almost correct. "Start with Cedric Vane," he said. Alden had removed his ceremonial cloak, but he still wore the iron chain of the High Reeve. He was lean, gray-eyed, and far too observant for my comfort. His oath lamp stood between us, its flame white and steady. The lamp would turn blue if I spoke a complete falsehood. Fortunately, complete falsehoods are for amateurs. I wrapped both hands around the cup he had given me and let them tremble. "Cedric wasn't the beginning," I said. "The wagon was." Alden leaned forward. So I told him how, 6 weeks earlier, the watch had dragged 5 strangers into the same holding chamber. Cedric Vane arrived first. He was 36, broad-shouldered, and carried himself like a man who still heard military drums even when the room was silent. He had once served as a royal housecarl. Then army silver disappeared under his supervision, and the court convicted him before sunset. By the time I met him, he had spent 3 years building a legal river-hauling business that nobody trusted, because a dishonest court had officially declared him dishonest. Hilda Stone came next. She was 32, wore her dark hair in a practical braid, and had 3 lockpicks hidden in places the watch had failed to search. Hilda repaired vaults, temple doors, and rune mechanisms. She also possessed the unusual social gift of making every authority figure feel like an apprentice who had misunderstood a basic instruction. Wulfmar was shoved through the door while arguing that possession of 12 untaxed wine jars did not prove he intended to sell them. "It proves poor storage," he insisted. Wulf was 27, charming, reckless, and capable of remembering every river depth between Wyrmford and the sea while forgetting where he had placed the money from his last job. Bran Fox arrived smelling of malt and burnt wool. He was 41, owned the remains of a brewery, and had once supplied fire powder to the watch. "It was never fire powder," he told us immediately. "It was a controlled pressure compound." The watchman locking the door said, "It exploded." Bran looked offended. The warehouse underwent unexpected ventilation. Then there was me, an oath-scribe with a limp. A woman who had never been arrested. A woman who, according to the watch, had altered a customs record and stolen 3 black-sealed contracts from the toll court. I told the officer there had been a mistake. He laughed. That was his first mistake. The 5 of us had no obvious connection. Cedric moved cargo, Hilda made locks, Wulf avoided tolls, Bran corrected architecture, I copied words. Yet the arrest warrants were written by the same hand. The charges all mentioned a missing royal salt wagon. And each warrant carried a black wax seal, shaped like a crow's wing. Most people in Wyrmford knew the stories. The Ash Crow was said to command thieves across 5 kingdoms. Some claimed he was a dead Mercian prince. Others said he was a monk who had removed his own name from the Book of Heaven. A fishmonger in the Eel Ward swore the crow had antlers. People become imaginative when fear has no face. Cedric examined the seal and looked at the rest of us. Someone wants us connected. Hilda had already opened one of her wrist chains. Then whoever arranged this is either very clever or extremely optimistic. Wolf grinned. I prefer optimistic enemies. Bran sat on the bench beside me. Do you know why they arrested you? I looked down at my shaking hand. Yes, I said. That was the first answer I gave them that was entirely true. Because 6 months earlier, I had found evidence that Wyrmford's most powerful merchants were altering magical debts. Because Hilda had discovered impossible changes in prison locks. Because Cedric had traced missing military silver to a harbour account. Because Bran had identified royal rune powder hidden beneath his brewery. Because Wolf had transported 3 families whose debt bonds should not have existed. Someone had finally realized we were all touching different parts of the same secret. And whoever it was had locked us in one room to discover how much we knew. The sensible response would have been silence. Instead, Hilda glanced at the oath rune above the door and asked me, "How long before they return?" I touched the ashwood bench beneath my palm. A whisper moved through it. Not a voice exactly. More like the memory of a voice pressed into grain. Midnight. Search the homes. Move the records. Burn what remains. 23 minutes, I said. Cedric's eyes narrowed. How do you know? I heard the watchman outside. There was no watchman outside. But there had been one inside the room 3 hours earlier, planning what would happen after our arrest. I had heard his intention, lingering in the wood. At that point, the others still believed I was the least dangerous person among them. I found that comforting. Hilda opened the door in 6 minutes. She would have done it in 4, but a brass ward inside the lock kept biting her pick. This mechanism was designed by an idiot, she whispered. Can you open it? Cedric asked. Obviously, I am criticizing the idiot, not surrendering to him. We slipped into the service corridor shortly before the watch returned. Wolf wanted to flee through the tannery drains. Bran wanted to search the records room. Cedric wanted proof that the arrests had been arranged illegally. Hilda wanted her confiscated tools. I wanted all 4 of them to keep arguing for another 30 seconds. The holding chamber had confirmed something I had suspected for years. The Black Oar Circle knew someone was investigating it, but it did not know who. The Circle was an alliance of aldermen, merchants, toll officers, and rune priests who quietly controlled Wyrmford's river trade. They inflated debts, seized workshops, purchased prisoners as labor, and rewrote testimony when inconvenient facts appeared. 15 years earlier, they had altered my father's debt oath. He had borrowed 12 silver pennies to repair our family workshop. The official record later claimed he owed 12 silver pounds. When he objected, the court convicted him of insulting a royal instrument, seized our home, and sent him to the northern quarries. He died there 11 months later. My younger sister, Elsie, was placed in bonded service to settle the remaining debt. I joined the toll court at 14 because clerks are permitted to stand close to powerful men while remaining invisible. For 15 years, I copied their contracts. I learned their seals. I memorized their habits. And whenever I found an oath that had been altered, I listened. My ability began when I was 7. I had touched the kitchen table after my parents argued and heard my mother's fear humming inside the wood. At first, echo reading gave me only fragments, a word, a smell, a flash of emotion that belonged to someone else. By 29, I could separate recent voices from old ones, but the magic remained unreliable. Strong feelings lasted longer. Fear stained everything. Greed had a metallic taste. Guilt felt warm until you looked directly at it. The 5 of us reached the evidence room just as boots sounded below. Hilda recovered her tools. Cedric found copies of our arrest orders. Bran found a crate containing 12 jars of his missing pressure compound. Wolf found his wine. Priorities, he said when Cedric stared at him. I found a route schedule for the missing salt wagon. It had not left the city. It was due to cross the old western bridge at dawn. They are moving something, I said. Cedric unfolded the schedule. Royal salt. No. How can you tell? Salt wagons use reinforced axles. This one has passenger suspension. Hilda glanced at me. That was the first moment she realized I was not merely a frightened clerk. We escaped through the archive roof and separated before sunrise. The official story claimed 5 dangerous suspects had broken out of custody. The truth was less flattering. The watch had forgotten that the records room shared a chimney with a bakery. Bran removed one iron plate. Hilda opened a ventilation grate. Cedric lowered us by curtain rope. Wolf became stuck halfway through because he refused to leave the wine behind. I landed badly in the alley and allowed Cedric to see the pain on my face. Some pain was genuine. My leg had been injured when I was 12, though it had healed properly years ago. I kept the cane because powerful men became careless around visibly damaged women. Cedric wanted us to leave Wyrmford immediately. Hilda wanted to intercept the wagon. Bran wanted his name cleared. Wolf wanted breakfast. I wanted the documents inside that wagon. We met beneath the abandoned St. Oswin Mill 3 hours later. A trained magpie swooped through the broken roof and dropped a stolen brass button into Hilda's hand. That, Hilda said, is Bishop. The bird tilted its head at us. Wolf pointed. Why is it called Bishop? Because he takes offerings from rich men. Bishop hopped onto Hilda's shoulder. Bran said, last winter he stole a spoon from a blind nun. Hilda looked at the bird. Everyone makes one doctrinal error. The wagon would cross the western bridge in less than 2 hours. Cedric studied the route and assigned positions without asking permission. That was the housecarl in him. Wolf would block the road with a broken cart. Bran would disable the alarm rune. Hilda would open the rear compartment. Cedric would control the guards. He looked at me. You stay behind the wall. I nodded. Hilda watched me nod. She knew before he did that I had no intention of obeying. The operation should have been simple. It nearly failed before the wagon arrived. I touched a watch hut beside the bridge and read the residue of the last patrol briefing. 4 guards. Change at second bell. Cross by Western Arch. I repeated the information. Cedric positioned us accordingly. Then a second wagon appeared through the fog on the northern road. I had misunderstood the echo. The officer had not said Western Arch. He had said west of the arch. Cedric dragged me behind a stone marker as 2 mounted guards passed within 10 paces of us. You were certain, he whispered. I was wrong. He stared at me, perhaps expecting an excuse. I had none. My gift was not a prophecy. That mattered. It also meant the others could not blindly follow me, which would eventually save all of us. We adjusted. Wolf rolled the cart into the road. Bran touched a heated wire to the alarm stone. Hilda entered the wagon before it fully stopped. Cedric persuaded the guards to surrender through a combination of calm authority and the observation that Bran was holding a jar of rapid architectural correction. Nobody was injured. The rear compartment contained no salt. It held 47 property bonds, 9 prison transfer orders, and a black ledger nomming families whose debts had already been paid. At the bottom lay a sealed document authorizing 17 prisoners to be transferred aboard a royal barge called the St. Mercy. Beside the passenger list, someone had written 2 words. Name bearer. Departure, 6 days. I read those words twice. Then I saw my sister's name among the bonded servants scheduled to load the vessel. Edith Fen. For 15 years, I had believed I was moving carefully. At that moment, careful became another word for late. We hid the wagon inside Bran's ruined brewery. The roof had never been repaired after the so-called unexpected ventilation, so moonlight fell directly across the vats. Cedric read the transfer orders, while Hilda inspected the black wax. Wolf searched for drinkable beer and discovered Bran had labeled each barrel according to danger. One said mild. One said strong. The third said do not strike. Wolf selected mild. Bran took it from him. That refers to structural damage. Why is it stored beside the ale? Because I used to own a brewery. While they argued, I examined Elsie's transfer order. She had been in service to Alderman Osric Vale for 9 years. Osric was Wyrmford's most respected river official. He funded orphan meals, repaired bridge shrines, and spoke publicly about the moral importance of paying one's debts. His warehouses also received most of the property, confiscated through altered oaths. The document named the St. Mercy as a royal evidence vessel, but the harbour mark belonged to Osric's private dock. Cedric noticed. So Vale is moving witnesses. Or selling them, Hilda said. Bran shook his head. Too much secrecy for labourers. Cedric turned to me. What does name-bearer mean? I don't know. That answer was true. I knew only that the phrase had appeared in 3 sealed conversations I had echoed during the previous year. Each time, someone had reacted with fear. Before we could examine the remaining papers, Bishop flew through the roof carrying a strip of grey cloth. Hilda held out her hand. The magpie ignored her and landed on my cane. A man stood in the brewery doorway. He wore a grey robe, clean gloves, and the expression of someone arriving precisely when invited. Good evening, he said. My employer congratulates you on surviving the watch. Cedric drew a short blade but kept it low. Who is your employer? The man smiled. You know the answer. Wolf looked at the black feather embroidered inside the man's sleeve. The ash crow. The stranger bowed. He called himself Merwin. He knew Cedric's daughter was serving in Lady Beornwyn's household. He knew Hilda's younger brother had been imprisoned for a robbery committed by an alderman's son. He knew Wolf's mother had 9 days before the Mar Inn was seized. He knew Bran's warehouse fire had been ordered by the reeve's nephew. And he knew where Elsie slept inside Osric's estate. The room changed as he spoke. Cedric became very still. Hilda stopped touching her tools. Wolf's humor disappeared. Bran placed both hands flat on the table. Merwin said each of us had interfered with the Ash Crow's affairs. The stolen wagon contained property belonging to his employer. The Circle had accelerated its plans because of our escape. The St. Mercy would leave in 6 days during the midsummer fog. We were to board it, recover a silver chest, destroy its oath altar, and depart before the 3rd harbour bell. In exchange, the Ash Crow would erase our charges and release the people we cared about. Cedric asked what happened if we refused. Merwin removed one glove and examined his fingernails. Then Alderman Vale sails away with the only witnesses who can prove your innocence. No threat. No raised voice. He spoke as if discussing rain. Hilda disliked him immediately. After he left, she said, I hope his sleeves catch on every door handle he passes for the rest of his life. Cedric studied the grey cloth Bishop had stolen. Whoever sent him knows too much. Wolf looked at me. You are the oath-scribe. Is the Ash Crow real? I rested both hands on my cane. People have lost fortunes because of him. That was not my question. No, I said, it was. Cedric voted to refuse. He believed the mission had been designed to kill us and leave the Crow's enemies blamed for whatever happened aboard the barge. Hilda agreed with him. Bran wanted to examine the harbour defences before deciding. Wolf wanted to know how large the silver chest was. I wanted Elsie. I also wanted the hidden mechanism that could alter a magical oath after it had been sworn. So I made the argument that trapped us all. If we leave, I said, The circle moves 17 prisoners, the evidence disappears, and Osric remains untouchable. We can refuse the ash crow. We cannot refuse what happens afterward. Cedric looked at me for a long time. You speak as though you know his plan. I know Osric's. That was not enough for him, but it was enough for the others. We spent the next 5 days preparing. Wulf mapped the milled channels beneath the harbour. Bran created a compound that would flood defensive runes with harmless foam. Hilda built 3 keys from impressions Bishop stole. Cedric contacted 2 watchmen who had served with him and still believed he had been framed. I worked inside the toll court by day, pretending the escape had terrified me into cooperation. The watch had officially released me, claiming I had been kidnapped by the other 4. Alden Holt questioned me once during those 5 days. He asked whether Cedric had spoken about the ash crow. I told him Cedric rarely spoke at all. Alden watched my trembling hand. I watched his oath lamp. Neither of us learned anything useful. At night, Hilda helped me practice separating echoes. She placed 6 objects on Bran's table and asked me to identify which one had been handled by Wulf after learning about his mother's inn. I touched a cup. Embarrassment. A bent nail. Anger. A wool glove. Fear concealed beneath a joke. That one, I said. Hilda nodded. Then I touched a brass key. For 3 seconds, I was no longer Edith Fen. I was a 7-year-old boy hiding beneath a bed while someone hammered on a door. I dropped the key and forgot where I was. Hilda caught my shoulders. Edith. I stared at her. She repeated my name until it belonged to me again. That was the cost of echo reading. Memories did not enter politely. They arrived wearing muddy boots and sometimes refused to leave. Hilda made me promise not to read the St. Mercy's altar alone. I promised. The oath lamp was not present. Even then, I think she knew. On the 4th night, Cedric followed Merwin. He returned to the brewery before dawn with mud on his boots and fury held tightly behind his teeth. He waited until Wulf and Bran had left, then placed a strip of paper in front of me. It contained instructions written in my hand. Meet beneath East Gate. Bring harbour seal. Cedric looked at Hilda. Merwin received this from Edith. Hilda read the note twice. Then she looked at me. I had prepared explanations for nearly every possible discovery. None sounded convincing while she was holding proof. Cedric shut the brewery door. Who are you? My name is Edith Fen. That is not what I asked. I considered lying. That instinct told me more about myself than I wanted to know. I found Merwin 8 years ago, I said. His real name is Merrick. He is an actor. Wulf, who had apparently not left and was listening from behind a grain bin, rose slowly. The terrifying servant of the underworld performed in The Lovesick Miller. Merrick had played the miller. Poorly. That is not the important part, I said. It is important to me. Cedric ignored him. You sent the message. Yes. You arranged the job. I arranged parts of it. Hilda's expression hardened. How many parts? I told them some of the truth. I had created contacts across the river wards. I had leaked evidence against corrupt officials. I had encouraged stories about an unseen figure, so witnesses would protect themselves by claiming they served someone powerful. The Ash Crow was not one person. It was a name. A threat. A shadow large enough to make guilty men reveal what frightened them. Cedric stared at me. You used us. I brought together people already marked by the same enemy. You let us believe we had no choice. We did not have a safe choice. That is not the same thing. He was right. I hated him for being right at such an inconvenient moment. Hilda asked one question. Did you arrange our arrests? No. Did you know they were coming? I suspected. And you warned none of us. If I had warned you, Osric would have known which investigation frightened me. Her face changed then. Not anger. Disappointment. It was worse. Hilda supported my goal. She wanted the circle exposed as much as I did, but she had believed we were partners. I had treated her like a piece I could not risk losing, which was still treating her like a piece. Cedric left before sunrise. At noon, Osric Vale summoned him to the White Keep. We learned about the offer from a servant in Cedric's transport yard. A royal pardon. The return of his business. His daughter released from noble service. All he had to do was identify the ash crow and deliver the rest of us to the harbor watch. Cedric did not return that night. Or the next morning. By the 5th evening, the midsummer fog had begun rolling upriver. Hilda packed her tools without speaking to me. Wolf counted our remaining coins and discovered he had miscounted them the first 2 times. Bran tested the foam compound against a stolen harbor rune. The rune filled the brewery with bubbles. Bishop landed in the largest one and rode it across the room. Wolf laughed until Hilda looked at him. Then he pretended to cough. I opened the final document recovered from the wagon. It was an inventory of objects scheduled for destruction aboard the St. Mercy. 17 altered debt bonds. 1 witness identified as Brother Elwyn. 1 silver reliquary. 1 royal oath fragment. The Tongue of Kings. I had heard the name once before, in the residue beneath Osric's private oath desk. The fragment came from the throne of a conquered kingdom. A skilled rune priest could place it beneath an oath altar and overwrite the magical afterscript of any agreement connected to it. That was how the circle had changed thousands of debts without shattering the city's truth lamps. The name bearer, Brother Elwyn, could hear the original rhythm beneath an altered oath. He was not cargo. He was the only living person who could prove exactly what Osric had done. Hilda listened while I explained. When I finished, she said, destroying the altar will release every overwritten oath attached to it. Yes. How many? I don't know. You always know. Not this time. The silence between us lasted long enough for Bishop to steal the buckle from my satchel. Hilda took it from him and returned it to me. If the altar releases everything at once, what happens to you? I knew what she meant. For years, I had echo-read altered contracts and carried fragments of them inside my memory. If the original oaths reasserted themselves, the false echoes could be torn away. I might lose nothing. I might lose every memory connected to the investigation. I might lose parts of myself. I don't know, I said again. Hilda stepped closer, then stopped deciding alone. That should have been easy. Instead, it felt more dangerous than boarding the barge. So I did what frightened people often do. I delayed the honest answer until events made it useless. At midnight, the first harbor bell sounded. Cedric had not returned. We launched without him. Wolf guided our fishing boat through channels narrower than Bran's shoulders. The midsummer fog reduced the harbor to bells, shadows, and wet timber. Rune lamps glowed beneath the water, marking routes for vessels authorized to pass the royal chain. We had no authorization. We had Bishop. 2 hours earlier, the magpie had entered a harbor officer's room through an open shutter and returned carrying a black wax seal. Hilda held it against the chain post. The metal links sank beneath the river without a sound. Excellent moral judgment, she whispered. Bran looked at Bishop. Blind none. The St. Mercy waited beyond the eastern warehouses. It was a long black vessel with a covered central deck and 6 defensive runes carved along each side. Osric had placed 12 private guards aboard, 4 rune priests, and at least 20 prisoners below. Our plan depended on entering unseen. We reached the stern ladder. Then 3 watch boats emerged from the fog. Cedric stood in the first. He wore his old housecarl cloak. Alden Holt stood beside him. For one cold second, I believed Cedric had accepted Osric's bargain. That was the natural consequence of keeping secrets from everyone. Eventually, every silence begins to look like betrayal. Cedric raised one hand. The watchboats surrounded the St. Mercy. By order of the High Reeve, he called, this vessel will submit to inspection. Osric appeared on the upper deck. He wore a fur-lined cloak, despite the warm night. This is royal cargo. Alden answered, then royal records will confirm it. Osric's private guards moved toward the prisoner's hatch. Cedric had not brought the watch to capture us. He had brought honest witnesses, so Osric could not quietly kill everyone aboard. It was a better plan than mine. I disliked how relieved that made me. While the two authorities argued, Wolf pulled us alongside the shadowed hull. Hilda opened the stern door. Bran pressed his foam compound into the first defensive rune. White bubbles poured across the carved symbol, muffling its alarm. He watched the foam spread. I spent 11 years developing controlled ignition mixtures. Wolf climbed past him. Tonight you are a soap merchant. I hope the river takes you. It has tried. Below deck, the prisoners were chained in 2 compartments. Hilda opened the first. I found Elsie in the second. She was 23 now. The last time I had seen her without Osric's permission, she had been 14. She recognized me immediately. Not because of my face. Because of the cane. You still use that thing, she whispered. I nearly laughed. Instead, I touched her cheek and forgot every sentence I had prepared during the previous 9 years. Elsie solved the problem by hugging me. Then she stepped back and looked at the unlocked prisoners. Are we leaving? Yes. Good, I stole Osric's strongroom key. She held up a brass key. Bishop swooped down and took it from her. Hilda closed her eyes. The magpie disappeared into the corridor. One day, she said, I will train him. Bran snorted. He has trained you. Brother Elwyn was held alone beneath the oath chamber. He was a thin, blind monk with silver threaded through his beard. Someone had bound bells around his wrists so the guards could hear him move. When I said his name, he turned toward me. You carry too many voices, he said. I had not told him what I could do. Hilda noticed. Can you open the altar? I asked. No. Can you identify the true oaths beneath it? Yes. Can we reverse them? Elwyn tilted his head toward the deck above, listening to something none of us could hear. If the tongue remains connected, the first oath can call the others home. And the ship. The false afterscripts will burn. Bran looked almost pleased. How much burning? All of it. His pleasure disappeared. The silver chest was locked inside Osric's strongroom. Bishop returned with Elsie's key and 3 unrelated buttons. Hilda opened the door. The chest contained no treasure. Inside lay a dark strip of carved wood, wrapped in silver wire. The tongue of kings looked disappointingly ordinary. That was often true of the worst things. The oath altar stood in the center of the room, connected by ashwood channels to hundreds of wax tablets. I touched one. A widow promising to repay 12 pennies. The echo changed. 12 pounds. Another tablet. A soldier confessing he had lost no silver. The echo changed. He had stolen it. Cedric's oath. Another. My father's voice. I pulled my hand away. For 15 years, I had tried to remember exactly how he sounded. The altar held the answer. It also held the lie that had killed him. Above us, boots hammered across the deck. Osric had realized the prisoners were free. Hilda inserted the tongue into the altar. Every wax tablet began to glow. Elwyn placed both hands on the central stone. The first altered oath must be spoken aloud. Which one? Wolf asked. The root agreement, the promise from which the others borrowed authority. I searched the echoes. Thousands of voices pressed against me. Debtors, prisoners, officials, merchants, my father. The chamber tilted. Hilda caught my arm. Edith, stop. I can find it. You promised not to read the altar alone. You are here. That is a clerk's answer. Then a heavy door slammed somewhere below us. Hilda looked toward the sound. Bishop had flown into the lower corridor with Osric's seal in his beak. Hilda went after him. A locking rune flashed. The passage sealed behind her. Osric's voice came through the speaking tube. You may have the monk, he said. You may even free the servants. Bring me the tongue and I will open the door. I heard Hilda strike the other side once. Then silence. Osric knew exactly what choice he was offering. The relic or the person. The perfect plan, or the woman who had asked me to stop treating people like pieces. I could have followed Osric. The strong room had a second exit leading to the upper deck. If I took the tongue, climbed the ladder, and reached the harbour altar before the third bell, I could still reverse every corrupted oath. Hilda would remain trapped below. Osric expected me to choose the plan. He had studied the Ash Crow's work for years. He believed the Crow sacrificed individuals for larger victories because that was what Osric himself would have done. He understood my methods. He did not understand that I was tired of becoming him. I left the tongue in the altar. Then I placed both hands against the sealed passage and opened myself to every echo in the ship. Veer struck first. Prisoners hiding near the stern. Guards uncertain whether Osric would protect them. Cedric shouting on the upper deck. Alden demanding legal authority. Wolf trying to move 17 people through a corridor designed for 8. Bran calculating how quickly rune fire moved through wet timber. And beneath it all, Hilda. Not frightened. Furious. Her anger vibrated through the locking mechanism. I followed it. The rune was not attached to the door. It was anchored to a brass key on Osric's belt. The physical door could be opened without breaking the spell if someone removed the anchor. Bishop had already done that. The magpie appeared through a ventilation gap, carrying a brass key twice the size of his head. He dropped it into my hand. I laughed so suddenly that Elwyn turned toward me. Unexpected good news, he asked. Excellent moral judgment. The key opened the passage. Hilda emerged with soot on her face and a hammer in one hand. You left the altar. Yes. You chose me. Yes. She looked at me for a long moment. This is a terrible time to become emotionally responsible. I know. She took the key. Try not to relapse. The third harbour bell would sound in 9 minutes. Cedric reached us with Alden and 6 watchmen. Osric's private guards followed, but Cedric blocked the corridor. He did not fight them so much as make every advance look professionally embarrassing. A shield turned, a wrist redirected. A man found himself seated against a wall without understanding how he had arrived there. Alden entered the chamber and stared at the glowing altar. What is this? Evidence, I said. Osric appeared behind the guards. No, he said, it is a weapon. That was clever. He could not deny the altar existed, so he changed the argument. He told Alden I was the Ash Crow's servant. He claimed Cedric had organized the escape. He said Brother Elwyn was a foreign agent. He offered to surrender the tongue to the crown if Alden arrested us first. Alden looked at Cedric, then at me. His certainty shifted toward the largest, most dangerous-looking man in the room. Even then, Osric understood how Alden's mind worked. Cedric saw it too. He lowered his weapon. I will submit to arrest, he said, after the monk speaks. Alden hesitated. Osric did not. He reached for the tongue. Hilda struck his hand, sighed with the flat of her hammer. No, she said. Osric looked at me. You think you are different from me. The second bell faded above us. He stepped closer. You built a phantom and used frightened people to serve it. You withheld the truth from your allies. You decided which lives could be risked. You lied because you believed your purpose made the lie clean. Every accusation contained enough truth to hurt. That is why you will fail, he continued. You need everyone to believe the story you chose. I only need them to fear what happens without me. For years, I had imagined confronting Osric. In those fantasies, I gave a perfect answer. The real answer was smaller. I am not different enough, I said, but I can still choose differently now. I asked Cedric to protect the prisoners. I asked Wolf to prepare the boats. I asked Bran to redirect the rune fire through the empty cargo rooms. I asked Hilda to open the altar channels. I asked Elwyn to speak the first true oath. I did not order them. I told them the risk. Bran said the ship might burn before we escaped. Wolf said the eastern current could carry us clear if the harbour gate opened within 4 minutes. Cedric said Alden's watchmen would help the prisoners if they understood what Osric had done. Hilda said revering the altar could tear memories out of my mind. They chose to stay. That difference mattered. Elwyn touched the central stone and spoke in a voice barely louder than breath. I, Osric Vale, swear that no debt recorded beneath this altar shall be altered after its witness departs. The first oath. The rule Osric had created to persuade early merchants that the system was safe. The promise from which every later corruption borrowed authority. The altar answered. 1 wax tablet cracked. Then 10. Then hundreds. Original words rolled through the chamber like thunder heard beneath water. I placed my hands on the tongue. The echoes entered me all at once. 1,000 stolen homes. Children separated from parents. Soldiers convicted for missing silver. Prisoners signing agreements they could not read. My father promising to repay 12 pennies. I held onto his voice. The magic tore it away. Rune fire raced through the ashwood channels. Bran opened 3 pressure valves. Foam burst across the ceiling. Wolf shouted that we had 2 minutes. Cedric lifted Elwyn. Hilda dragged me from the altar. Osric stood in the center of the chamber, as every agreement he had altered reclaimed its original meaning. His authority seal split down the middle. Nobody struck him. Nobody needed to. The laws he had manipulated simply stopped recognizing him. We escaped through the stern, as pale fire consumed the Saint Mercy. The blast threw our boats apart, but did not shatter them. Fog swallowed the river. For several minutes, I knew neither my name nor where I was. Then I heard Hilda calling me. Not the title. Not the legend. My name. I followed it back. Alden's watch found me at dawn, beside the eastern embankment. I had separated from the others when our boat struck a submerged chain. That part was true. I was exhausted, half frozen, and unable to remember several hours of the previous night. That was also true. The rest required arrangement. Alden brought me to the oath chamber and questioned me for 5 hours. I told him Cedric had recruited us after the false arrest. I told him the Ash Crow's messenger knew details only a criminal mastermind could know. I told him Cedric understood the harbor patrols, manipulated the watch, and reached the Saint Mercy through routes used by royal soldiers. None of those statements was entirely false. Cedric had recruited us into the escape. The messenger knew secrets. Cedric understood the harbor. The oath lamp remained white. Alden interrupted constantly. Why would Cedric pretend reluctance? To make us trust him. Why involve you? I could read contracts. Why rescue the monk? To destroy Osric's evidence. Why burn the barge? To erase his own involvement. Each answer guided him toward the conclusion he already preferred. He wanted the Ash Crow to be one man. A former soldier. A commander hiding inside a group of lesser criminals. Alden was intelligent enough to notice every inconsistency in my story, but each contradiction made Cedric appear more sophisticated. When I forgot a location, Alden supplied one. When I hesitated over a name, my eyes moved across the room. A brewer's account, signed by Bran Fox, rested beside his hand. A locksmith's complaint from Hilda Ward lay beneath the oath lamp. A military report mentioned Cedric Vale. A ferry map marked Wolf Mill. A tapestry of St. Mercy hung behind Alden's chair. A ceramic cup carried the maker's stamp of Merrick Kiln. A prayer book lay open to Brother Elwyn's feast day. I had used some real names. Others I had borrowed. The story became a garment stitched from truth, memory, and whatever Alden left within reach. The most dangerous moment came when he placed my cane on the table. Cedric carried you from the river. Yes. The lamp flickered. Not blue. Not white. Alden noticed. He did not. I don't remember. That was true by then. Memory bleeding had taken pieces of the escape. I knew Cedric had survived because Hilda had told me so before we separated, but I could no longer picture his face in the boat. Alden leaned back. You admire him. No. The lamp stayed white. You fear him. Yes. The flame trembled. I feared Cedric's judgment. I feared what he would think when he understood how completely I had used him. Again, the lamp accepted the sentence while Alden misunderstood its meaning. By midday, he believed he had solved everything. Cedric Vane was the ash crow. Merwin had been his servant. The other suspects had been expendable tools. The St. Mercy had carried evidence Cedric needed destroyed. I was the frightened survivor left behind to spread one final false version of the event. Alden pressed until I cried. The tears were real. That helped. He told me Cedric had never cared whether I survived. I allowed my shoulders to collapse. He told me I had been manipulated by a man cleverer than I could understand. I covered my face. Then he did exactly what I needed. He dictated my release statement. I repeated the official account, signed Edith Fen at the bottom, and asked whether I could leave. Alden returned my cane. You were fortunate. Yes, I said. That might have been the closest I came to a complete lie. I limped through the White Keep, past the guards, down the steps, into the Long Market. Morning trade had resumed despite the fire. Bakers shouted prices. Wool merchants argued over wet bundles. A charm seller claimed his copper rings prevented river ghosts, toothache, and unhappy marriages. I turned the first corner. My limp shortened. At the second, I straightened my back. At the third, I removed the cloth wrapped around my trembling hand. A black carriage waited beside a closed dye shop. Merrick sat in front wearing a driver's coat. You told Alden I was a refined foreign lawyer, he asked. You were convincing. I studied for 3 weeks. You pronounced harbour as herber. It is a regional accent. Hilda held the reins beside him. Bishop sat on the roof. The magpie carried a silver button in his beak. I looked back toward the White Keep. Inside the oath chamber, Alden Holt was still standing among the objects from which I had assembled his truth. He would notice Bran's name first. Then Hilda Ward. Then Wolf Mill. He would look at the St. Mercy tapestry. He would examine Merrick's mark beneath the cup. He would understand that the frightened woman in his chair had built an entire conspiracy from the room around him. By the time he reached the street, the carriage was moving. I placed my cane beneath the seat. Merrick glanced over his shoulder. Where is Cedric? North Gate. Wolf. Taking the prisoners downriver. Bran. Complaining that nobody appreciated his valves. Hilda looked at me. And who are you today? For 15 years, I had possessed a name for every situation. Edith the clerk. Edith the limping witness. The ash crow. I had no clever answer left. Edith, I said. Hilda nodded. It was enough. At sunrise, every oath altered by the tongue of kings returned to its original form. The change did not arrive dramatically. No voice spoke from the clouds. No black tower collapsed. A widow in the eel ward simply discovered that the court could no longer seize her house. A cooper serving a 20-year debt watched the number on his bond fade from pounds back into pennies. 6 soldiers imprisoned for stealing royal silver saw their confessions split open and reveal the words they had actually spoken. Across Wyrmford, authority seals cracked in the hands of officials whose rank depended on corrupted promises. Osric lost control of the Black Harbour before midday. His allies abandoned him before evening. That was the weakness of a conspiracy built from manufactured loyalty. Once everyone discovered that Osric had altered their agreements too, they stopped protecting him and started searching for proof that someone else was guiltier. 3 aldermen fled. 2 room priests confessed. 7 merchants offered to cooperate with the crown. The royal court seized Wyrmford's toll authority and froze every account connected to the Black Oar Circle. Alden kept his position. He had not served Osric, and he was too useful to discard. But witnesses later said he began asking different questions. Not only, who controls this? Sometimes, what if nobody does? Cedric's conviction was voided. The missing army silver had been transferred through Osric's harbour accounts. His daughter Mara was released from noble service, though Cedric discovered she had grown into a young woman capable of making her own decisions and had no intention of becoming the obedient child he remembered. That may have frightened him more than the Saint Mercy. Hilda's brother received a new trial and was freed within 12 days. Wolf's mother kept the Marin. Wolf celebrated by purchasing a boat he could not afford, losing it in a card game, and winning it back because the man who beat him turned out to be using marked tiles. Bran received compensation for his brewery. He rebuilt the western wall, but left a section of the damaged roof uncovered. For ventilation, he said. Elsie came with us. Freedom did not instantly make us sisters again. 9 years could not be repaired by opening a lock. She remembered birthdays I had missed, illnesses I had not known about, and promises I had made when she was 14. She was grateful to be free and furious that I had taken so long. Both feelings were fair. For the first month, we argued about everything. Where to live. Whether I should continue using the cane. Why I had sent messages through strangers instead of finding her myself. Why I believed protecting someone meant excluding them from every decision. Hilda usually left the room when we argued. Not because she disliked conflict. Because Elsie had already begun asking whether Hilda intended to marry me, and Hilda claimed she preferred facing armed guards. There was no marriage. Not then. There were shared breakfasts, repaired locks, private jokes, and a habit of finding excuses to sit beside one another during long journeys. That was enough for the moment. My ability survived, though it changed. Echoes became quieter. I could still read fear in wood and anger in iron, but many memories tied to the circle were gone. I remembered my father's hands. I remembered the smell of his workshop. I remembered how he hummed while sharpening tools. I could not remember the sound of his speaking voice. For several weeks, I hated the victory for taking that from me. Then Elsie repeated something he had often told her. A tool is meant to build more than the hand that made it. I did not remember him saying it. I believed her anyway. That was new for me. The ash crow did not disappear. The name changed. I had created the legend because ordinary people were safer when corrupt officials believed a powerful mastermind protected them. But a legend centered on one invisible genius had recreated the same weakness as Osric's circle. Everything depended on one person controlling information. So I gave the name away. A black feather became a signal shared by ferrymen, scribes, servants, discharged soldiers, healers, traders, and anyone willing to move evidence where power could not bury it. No ranks, no central throne, no single crow. 3 months after Wyrmford, Alden received an unsigned package containing the complete black ore ledger. A feather rested inside. That same morning, officials reported ash crow activity in 4 cities, separated by more than 200 miles. A debt prison opened in Dunmere. A corrupt grain contract appeared on a church door in Eastmarsh. A stolen inheritance ledger reached a Mercian widow. A group of bonded miners vanished from a guarded road and reappeared safely across the border. Alden finally understood what Osric never had. Fear did not require one mastermind. It only required thousands of overlooked people discovering that they were no longer alone. Wyrmford spent 15 years searching rooftops for a monster in a black hood. None of them thought to look down at the woman copying their lies.